Hey, Anna.
Hey John, how's it going
How are you?
today?
It is going quite well. How's it going with you?
Oh, good.
Oh, my video's too. Sorry.
Oh, good.
I saw your picture. Hey, Nicole. Excuse me. I saw your picture of like a super calm Amsterdam.
So weird. It's like I went to the city center and I swear no one was out. Like no tourists, no bikes, nothing. And it's so weird because
Wow.
it's just this area in the city where you get all the crazy, people that are just out to smoke weed or whatever, buy their stupid souvenirs. It's just so hectic all the time. And it's just a complete different world. But at the same time, you can take great pictures. So,
Yeah, that was an awesome shot.
yeah. And you folks, are you staying mostly home these days?
Yeah, I am for sure. The kids are out of school. I think now till at least till
Hi,
the end
everyone.
of April. At least till the end of April, and then um, we're Nicole's training. We set up the garage is like a gym for her, and so on Monday mornings now she trains live over Zoom, like her gym class, which is pretty cool. But yeah, we only leave for groceries.
Yeah.
Sorry I'm a bit late, guys. I just went outside for the first time since
Sean?
Friday.
Oh wow!
Let me tell you, it's strange out there.
I can imagine. It's really weird here too. There's just
Yeah.
Did I get whiter?
no sun. I have a vitamin D deficiency right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Awesome.
geez.
Well, whoever added the number 8 to our agenda, thank you, Hayana. Because otherwise, I would have said number 7 for the 3rd time in a row. It's like we're celebrating our 21st birthday again, and again.
So, mine's next week.
Yeah, works for me.
Well, welcome to our Think Big number 8 for release management. We've had a couple of different topics to discuss here. I wonder if Nathan's going to make this meeting. I might ping him in a bit. But Sean, it looks like you have the first one up. Do you want to kind of voice over what you're asking here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's something that I'd actually like to ask this group, and I'm not quite. There's something I don't quite get, and so for me, from a code perspective, I've always associated a release with some set of code, right? Some set of commits, and okay, and then this is probably some features, right? And this is a release. But now we're also associating releases with milestones, and now we're talking about a period. And so I kind of I'm just wondering. I guess we look at the GitLab release. That's looking at it from that perspective, right? Like it's a month. Is that the kind of model we're going for here?
So I think when we look at what precipitated the release progress view and being able to associate a release to a milestone is that oftentimes people are trying to reconcile the delivered versus planned metric. Yep. So they're wanting to see, what do I have planned, which is represented in an issue, and what has actually been delivered, which is oftentimes represented in a collection of commits, which is represented today by a release. I think one of the disconnects that we have is that a release can be a single commit, which is the release creation, and then people artificially attach information to that release because they can link anything to it, they can attach anything to it, and then it becomes a container for a bunch of information that is representative, right? It's not necessarily truthfully every commit packaged. So I think when we talk to Gabe and plan, his perspective is that releases should be more about the merge requests and the commits. So we should be focused on assigning maybe a release version to an issue, to an MR, because today we don't really have a great sense of what MR implements an issue, because an issue is very sprawling and an MR doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So
True.
a release can be multiple merge requests that reflect the implementation of potentially a single issue, depending on how company orchestrates their issues, what's planned, and what's actually delivered.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, go on.
So to like kind of dig in what you were asking, are we going after a particular model? And I would say no. We're trying to support as many release models as possible, which means somebody could be using a milestone to show a quarterly release schedule. So then they'll have multiple releases assigned to a milestone because that's rolling up to a quarterly release schedule. Or they have multiple iterations and sprints, and a milestone is representative of every 2-week releases. And then the release object is where they upload a bunch of images or binaries for then their customers to consume.
And so we're actually not enforcing, for example, if we have, like release dates that, for example, a commit could be outside of those dates, right? We don't, or do we want to consider enforcing stuff like that?
I think that's a good question. Hayana, what's your immediate reaction to that based off of the insights that we've collected?
I would ask first to Sean to repeat the question.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, in fact, I'll actually rephrase it slightly because I said commit, but I mean, if we have a release and we have, like a set period for the release, and then we may have merge requests. Well, they're both tricky actually, because commits, you might have been working on something for ages, right? It might be on a branch, and then the merge request though is when you've actually when you merge the master. I guess that's the merge request we're interested in, and when that's finally merged. And so, should we be, or are we planning to consider that when that merge request is made, do we care that it's actually inside those dates? Do we
should be validating, kind of like how in an epic today you have the option to override, right? And you can say, I want this epic to represent a given period of time and not be inherited, or we can inherit it. So for example, I've seen 3 use cases of a customer. The first one is, I'm going to use a release to track all the activities around a deployment. So I have a release that's going to start well before any changes are made to production. And then I'm going to have a date that is representative of 2 weeks after all of the desired changes to production have been made, so that we can validate defect leakage, or we can triage issues that are spun out of the release version tag. So that's one use case. Another use case is, I just want a representation of a version that we push to production, or a snapshot of our continuously deploying application, so that I can then sample when I get audited. So that's the second use case in a automated 100% world, where a date is going to be pretty arbitrary. They're just looking to take a regular snapshot of production so that they can then surface that during an audit or compliance need. And then the last use case is, I want to have a historical record of planned versus released changes to production. And that's where like the release page progress view is made and designed for. But all of these use cases are, we're addressing all of these use cases with this single page. And that's maybe why we're getting stuck on how should the time stamps work.
Exactly. I think that's where we are, because sorry. Yeah, thought I was going to sneeze. We create a release from a tag, and the tag is associated with a single commit. But are releases synonymous with tags, or can they have different meanings? Yeah.
They do have.
So all this stuff's a little bit muddy sometimes for me, but okay. So just back to the issue then. So yeah, so I think we can definitely have start and end option. So it would be optionally, right? Like we might have no start and end for a release. Would that be? I mean, we might have a release that's only based on a commit. Would that be correct?
I think what we should say.
Oh, we have a
is that-
we have a release date.
Yeah, like
Okay.
it'll default to release stat from a start and end date. And then if somebody manually specifies a start and end date, that will take, like that'll be the new dates. But default will be release stat, because the assumption is they're creating the release at the moment of deployment in that case.
So if we had those, maybe I'll just share my screen, or everyone can look at the doc, I guess. But if we had, would we, if we had these 4 fields, so collected at's different, but if we had starts at and ends at, and then no one specifies any date, do they all just become released at? All 3 of them are released at the same. So we would actually populate those dates with the actual released at date.
Yeah,
or,
and then in
alias
the
it or
UI,
something.
they should be able to override that in the future.
Exactly. So then they might override that at any time. Is that right?
Yes.
Or okay.
Which we should allow that. So for example, they create the release tag. Actually, they create a tag, and a bunch of people are making changes. And then their most recent tag, they decide that tag is going to be the release version that they want to declare. So then they take that tag, they might update it via the API in the future. Hopefully they'll be able just to, create a release from that tag. And then it shows up on the release page. Like today you would take that tag and you would add release notes so that it shows up on the release page. Like that's how somebody would do that in the UI today. That's how people are doing it in the UI today, is that they select that, they cherry pick that tag, and they say, I want this to be my release version. And then they start uploading arbitrary asset links to it via the API to give them like images or links to the container registry, or like Runner's a really good example for that. And then they manually manipulate the change log and they provide a link for that. So that's a really good example. Like Runner is probably the premium example there. And I think it defaulted to release stat. And since they can't specify any other dates, they aren't, right?
Yep. Okay. And then and also the reason I put the evidence collected out on there is just to kind of highlight that, when the evidence, we record that when the evidence object is actually created. So it could be, for example, half a second after the release is created, or if you had a future release date, it would be then, but it's not necessarily precise because of the delay in background processing.
Got it.
Okay. Yep. Okay. That's so to handle this, then really we just need to add these 2 columns, and it starts at and ends at, and handle the defaulting and everything, and have some way to update them.
And it's kind of a weird, because it's an if-then logic to kind of go through what Nathan is poking in at right now with overlapping with milestones. Like the release may not be associated with a milestone. So then it's going to default to release stat until somebody puts a start and end state in it. And then if they do at a later date associate a milestone, it should then override to the milestone dates. But then they may manually change those dates to have a different start and end date, even though they associated a milestone. So when I think about it, like we have a 12.8 release, and the 12.8 release then has the potential to have a 12.8.1 release for security patches, and a 12.8.2, 4, 5 for security patches in between. So the release cycle isn't just the 17th of the first month to the 22nd of the next month. It really is like the 17th to the 30th, because there's all these patches that happen afterwards. So the end date will be the 30th, even though we released our version on the 22nd, and there's a bunch of tags that subsequently follow that. But the release that we'd be tracking would be the first tag.
Yeah, and maybe when we do the docs, we might want to outline some of these scenarios, as an example of the way you might use it. And
I could also very open to creating a blog post too. And we should potentially talk to Marin on the delivery team. Marine, did I say that wrong? I'm waiting for Hayanna's eyebrow to go up. She's like, oh, this white person saying a name. And we can have him dog food it with his team and give us some feedback on if we should be prescriptive or not. Because the risk that we run is that we're trying to support those 3 main use cases that I have identified, but there's potentially 5 other use cases that we're actually addressing that we don't know.
I guess we've got to keep it flexible enough. Well, keep the rules strong enough so that they actually work, but at the same time keep flexible enough so that people can find their own way to work with it.
Totally. And I don't want to violate our like cardinal rule of no enforced workflows. And it's hard not to do that for releases, because releases are naturally, people think about them as a workflow archetype. Like, I plan a release, I do things for the release, I release the release, and then I track metrics to that release. So it's a very linear process for many companies. But at GitLab, we don't want to enforce a workflow. So we have to be mindful of like, how do we support many different kinds of patterns, whether they're doing design thinking and they want to be able to reopen issues so that they're able to track metrics of cycle time, or whatever these customers are doing their releases. Like, we can't constrain them and hamstring them.
Okay, so I mean, if I look at it just purely from the back end, it's relatively simple, right? We would just add these two fields. We would extend the API so that when you create a release, if they're not provided, they default to the release stat, which is also a default itself, and then have a way for those things to be changed through the API, and then I think the rest would be up to you, Nathan. I mean, obviously we would have any other endpoints we would need, but I guess that would be the most open way of doing it, right? It's just having, we have the extra data stores, and then we have a way to manipulate them.
I highlighted here a question that I heard from 3 of the last users we interviewed about the start date of a release. So imagine you're creating a release from scratch and you're also creating a tag, but then you change the start date, you put in the future. So that's an upcoming release. So a lot of people were confused about when the tag would officially be created and what would happen with the evidence for this release that has a different start date from, for example, the milestones that are associated to it, and also about visibility of all these assets and all this information. But mostly, is my tag created now? Is my evidence, I'm not ready yet to create this release. And I think it also relates to your point afterwards, John, about when we modify the end date. So I just wanted to highlight that we have some user insights as well around this.
It's an interesting question, Hyana, because so if we just take the simplest case and we just put a future date, well, then the release gets created then. But then if we have created the release and now we want to change the dates, what do we do then? Maybe we destroy it and create it again. Maybe that's the simplest way to do it. Oh
yeah, that makes sense, to destroy it and recreate it. That's probably what the users are expecting whenever we talk to them.
And then, and would the evidence then go with it, or would we try and keep the evidence?
So
the evidence makes it tricky, actually.
If people are updating the release stat date, then presumably it should just re-snapshot, right? Like if it's for a future date.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I say create and delete and recreate, I think if we want to keep the evidence, we'll have to just update it behind the scenes. From the user's perspective, that's what I guess would happen. But
I mean, with multiple release evidences, they would be able, if they're a premium customer, they'd just be able to create another release. It would just show up as a second release evidence. But if it's a core user, we should say that it would update their current release evidence.
Is there a use case where releases overlap?
So we can decide to say that if you have a patch and it is correcting something that's already been released, that it's a new release. We can say that that's how we support releases. But people typically like to see the relationship of a patch, but that's where we recommend semantic versioning as to show the major release that this is a sub-release of the major release. But then we get kind of conflated with the release dates, going back to Nathan's point, like even though 12.7.8 is tied to 12.7, it may be released in the middle of 12.9.
Exactly, yeah.
So sorting by release date makes that weird. But I think if I was to look at the problem that we need to solve first and foremost with the releases page and these dates, we need to allow users to say that their release activities are going to be outside of a particular deployment window, which may mean that a release may end in the middle of a second release that's already been started.
One question, you had mentioned about deleting and recreating releases. In my mind, that kind of implies that you would be either creating the release off a new tag or you'd be somehow moving the tag. And usually moving a tag is not considered best practice. Like that would be kind of you have to move it, you have to like force push the tag, which is kind of generally a bad thing. So I don't really know if we want to be pushing that as our solution, to be like deleting a release, moving the tag, and then recreating it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if we consider evidence, then if we delete the release, we delete the evidence by default, and to avoid doing that will be complicated. So
yeah.
Okay. So we update it then.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good call out, Nathan. Thank you for that. So let's just decision point is update the evidence.
One of the things that I'm looking at the user insights now, one of the users say that like for releases that have a custom date, or in the future or whatever, they say that it would be weird to have assets or to have evidence added to that upcoming release, because only having assets makes sense for something that you actually working with, not something that, you know, is for the future. So maybe, for example, your tag doesn't exist yet, or which doesn't make sense because you need to have a tag to create a release. But if you don't have assets to add to your release just yet, why would you create a release? So that's was also one of the open questions from users about the start. Not that's what's confusing to me, and also to some people are the start at and the release at, right? So they kind of overlap. And how do we want to prescribe this in the UI? Because, for example, if you add a milestone, the milestone would automatically, let's say, fill in a date picker component, right? Whatever, with that date. And if you change that on the interface, and you add some assets to that release, I don't know, how do we deal, for example, with the visibility of these items on the release page? Is this something that we have to worry about now? I'm brain farting.
I can give you a use case why you would. Hello? Yeah. I can give you a use case, Hannah, why we would want to create the release. And we don't actually support this directly. So for example, say you're I'm a maintainer on an open source project on another platform. And so what I do is, as people make pull requests and they get merged to master, so they're merged to master, but it's not released, right? So in fact, so that what I'll do is I create a release, but it's in a draft form. So as the maintainer, I can see it and I can add to it and everything, but no one else can see it, right? Unless they're also a maintainer or whatever. And so then I can put, for example, so-and-so did this pull request, thanks very much, etc. And then it's a Ruby thing, right? So then when it's published to Ruby Gems, that's when I consider it released. And that's that is the version number and everything. So that's a reason, I guess, we would want to have the ability to add to it before it's actually released. But it also kind of highlights, I don't know if we want this feature where a draft release that isn't visible to other users. And in fact, I was adding that to an issue this morning. And then the other use case might be if you had some other, maybe you just had some other assets that you wanted to add, some other, not the code assets, but some other binaries or something, or documents or something, and a place to put them as you develop them.
Mhm. And how are we dealing now with the visibility of upcoming releases? I think they show up for everyone, right? Okay.
Yep.
So they should only be visible to users, like should, or some users would prefer to have it hidden until, let's say, the start date. Right?
Maybe this is a toggle that's at the project level, hide upcoming releases, because I think the intent of upcoming releases was to recreate the GitHub functionality of draft releases. So I think that this is more like a visibility thing that we should allow users to set, which is a configuration item, not really into that, but I think that it might be something to think about if users don't want to show an in progress release without assets, because it does have a tag declared, right? Like a tag is already created, and now you're just updating that tag with a bunch of assets and stuff before the release.
Yeah. And we also had some people saying that they would like in the future, for example, to be able to specify some specific users that would get access to that release. So people that are not necessarily involved in the creating code, but I don't know, marketing people or whatever, just some external costumers, just some people that could visualize, could get access to that.
And would that be, is that like a future release or one that's already released?
The future release.
Okay.
So if it's a private project, for example, you can set to only members to see, or if it's I want to share with you because you are my stakeholder, should be able to do that, work with the permissions.
In fact, there's an open issue around this kind of floating around at the moment. One you pinged me on, Nathan, about who, when guests can see the release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it gets tricky because guests technically aren't supposed to see any tag information, but our releases are so tied into tags that the information we can actually show them is very limited.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a slight sidebar, but not apparently, but on a public project, a guest can see the code and the releases, but on a private project, they can't see the code. And so it doesn't make any sense for them to see the release. I don't know. They currently can, but I mean, there's this bug, of course. But aside from the bug,
here's a use case that I think we've seen about a couple of customers who are using GitLab for inner sourcing exclusively, that they want their inner sourcing companions to be able to see that this has been published. And then they know that they can go to the Artifactory that they have permissions to download that image and then use that as a part of their prescribed image for their inner sourcing campaign. But they're not using a public project because they're usually restricted to contractors or customers of that product. So they're inner sourcing because they're a consulting firm and they're building products.
Okay, so they can download the binaries, but they can't get to the actual code.
Right.
I see.
So that's where they want to have a
sense.
published project so they can download the stuff.
Yeah.
And see what's changed in the release notes, but they can't see the code. They can't see the source code.
Okay, yeah, that makes complete sense, actually. Makes it tricky too, though.
That's right. And I would say that, unfortunately, our releases feature is really popular in 3 camps. One of the camps is inner sourcing, another camp is embedded systems, and both of those customers would benefit from published private projects, like published releases for private projects. Because embedded systems would take that image and deploy it to a radio system or an RV system software, and then ship that RV to the customer, to the end user of the RV.
And so maybe adding to what Hyanna said earlier about, do we have, I mean, it's going to make this whole feature quite complicated, but do we have this way of saying this particular user can, have access control to the release and this other one can't? Is that what you were saying, Haya? Yeah. You can see how it'll add a lot, just that simple feature, because now we have to have access control on a per page level and somewhere to manage it. And
I need to think about this more.
Yeah, it sounds tough.
I think we should talk to Dennis again, Hyana, because he's one of the embedded systems folks. So he would be able to kind of illustrate how he was using GitHub. And we can probably do a comparison of like, what's his expected use case? Because he's really gunning for us to be able to upload binaries and files via the UI, because he wants to be able to publish these releases so that his customers who are consuming the software can then download it onto their hardware systems. So, but he doesn't want them to necessarily see the software that he's building.
Do we have a goal to be, you know, a superset of what GitHub could do, or not necessarily?
I think not necessarily. I would say we
Okay.
want to be very differentiated from GitHub, but we also want to be familiar enough that people who are coming over from GitHub know that this is where you would do those kinds of things that you would do in GitHub here. So we need to be able to reach the same use cases and solve those problems, but not in the exact same way.
Okay.
I'll take this note, but Nathan, kind of reading your item on just not allowing users to manually specify start and end date, you're just saying to go ahead and just use the milestone dates.
Yeah, it just maybe it's very possible I'm just not understanding all the use cases, but to me it feels like release is all about it's like snapshots of when your code is released, and then milestones are more for the time portion of that, like time boxing things. And so I thought that was kind of a nice different, like when we associated milestones with the release, that was a good way to do it. But now we're adding a start date to a release, and I'm just trying to think what that really means. If I go like to another software package somewhere, I don't really, and I see a list of releases, I don't really know what it means if it says this release started at this point in time. It's like the snapshot started at this point in time.
Yeah.
I can see like with milestones how like this is kind of the period of time where we worked on this release. So I guess, yeah, maybe it's possible I'm just not thinking through all the use cases.
No, I think you are. I feel like the milestone is going to catch like 90% of our users' needs, especially as we start to expand time boxes in the plan stage, where they'll be able to refine what time boxes they want and even specify custom time boxes. So maybe we just let plan handle the time boxes and we scratch this, Sean.
Yeah, I'm totally for that. In fact, what the reason I even put that table together in the first place was I was trying to work out, now how can we get rid of one of these dates, because we've got so many different dates. Because when you have too many dates, it just becomes confusing what they are.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to work out, is there some way, but then in the end, I kind of thought they're all different. But if release date and start date are the same, then I don't know, let's get rid of it. If that's agreeable, you know, let's get rid of one of them.
People are telling us they want to be able to manually specify the release date, but I think what they're saying is they want to be able to create a custom date range for their milestone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's feedback I can give back to Gabe, which he already knows, because this is where we're bridging the gap between people who want to see that delivered versus planned metric again. Right? That's pretty much what we're trying to solve for. So I do think that we can defer upstream to plan and ask plan to provide that time box ability for us. And that way we're truly separating deployment and time box planning and having those in two different places.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think it's okay too I know we're trying to support like all the use cases, but like that, I think it's okay to say that milestones are the way that you plan cadences and timings. And like, we have to be a little prescriptive and say, like, maybe that's not part of release because that is exactly what milestones are for. So
Yep.
In my mind, that's okay to do.
Jackie, I think you nailed it with the custom. It's like folks are trying to set custom milestones. That's where I was getting the disconnect in my head too, was it felt like start date and end date was almost a subset of a milestone basically. But what did those dates actually do? Was it capturing commits within that time frame? That was what was confusing me a little bit.
And Hyana, I know that customers are saying, I want to be able to specify this, but I think the problem that they're feeling is that milestones aren't flexible enough for them. but I don't feel like, I feel like we are deferring.
It can be because who was the last user that we talked to? But the third one, he said that I don't use milestones, but I want to just be able to just specify that it is going to be released. He said I don't care about the start date because we build and we work with releases on the fly whenever we have a patch version, whatever. But I want to be able to tell my team that this is going to be released next Thursday and just add an end date for that, for example. So in that case, you don't necessarily need a milestone, right? I think that's also that kind of like what you say, the flexibility. Maybe the milestones don't give him, and that he doesn't want to track things in this this time box, super strict time box that milestones will give you.
So does that person just want to set a future release date?
Yeah, he's using draft releases or upcoming releases. He, like in
Okay.
GitHub, he was using draft releases, and in
Okay.
GitLab, he's using upcoming releases. He's scheduling his releases.
Okay.
If it's Dennis, I think that's the one we're talking about. Dennis. We'll schedule a follow-up call with him, but I'm commenting on this issue right now. I'm going to move it out of the 13.0 milestone, and we will defer to the time box issue that I've already created, and we will rely on plan to make the time constraints of releases. Okay. I'm glad we fixed that, guys. All right. What's the next topic?
I think I have the next point. Let's see. Oh, so you've kind of already answered this, Jackie, but I was just asking how much work it would be to associate group level milestones with a release. And just because that would allow us to dog food that issue summary feature on GitLab.com, which would be really cool. Especially because we do a really good job of associating all of our issues with milestones. So that's like the perfect use case for that feature. So it'd be cool to dog food that.
Yeah. Let me link that issue here. Currently the issue is support releases at the group level. And there's a couple of ways that I was thinking about this. One, Hayan and I started talking about, which is creating a view at the group level. And then the next one is how do we connect releases with group milestones? So I might create a separate issue than the one I have currently scheduled. But I think Kraz weighted it at 1 MR. So we can definitely talk about it some more if we want to.
Cool. No, we don't need to get into the details, but as long as it's I'm glad that it's scheduled because that'd be really neat to start using.
And it's also one that Philip Hasper from another inner sourcing use case is really interested in, because they plan all of their epics at the group level. And that will be really powerful for other customers who are using epics as well.
Yeah, that's just like us. We can throw that. I think there's an internal customer label that would make sense for that
Yeah,
one.
I'll add that. Okay. Next topic. What's up?
I also have the next one. These are just two small things. While I was working on that script to update our releases page from our release posts, there's a couple things I thought of that I'm not sure how we're handling, and there might be solutions to this, but I just want to throw them out. So the first one is the order that we currently list that page in is the release date. It's kind of when they were created, or you can also specify the date. But it's not always quite as straightforward as that. For example, we release security patches, and we'll backport that release back to several major versions. And so technically, we'll release, let's say 12.9, and then we'll have a security patch that will apply all the way back to version 10. And so now in the releases page, it'll look like that version 10 was released after version 12, which is a little odd. So I almost wonder if we should be sorting, or have the option to sort by like just alphabetically, like by version number or something. I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
So I have this other issue that says allow sorting by different criteria for releases. So we have created at, updated at, due date, and start date. but I don't know if we actually have a start date anymore, because this issue is built off of the started at issue that we just kind of kiboshed. So maybe that's milestone start date, but I'll link that here too as well. I agree. Oh, whoever just linked that, great job. Thank you, Hyana. Look at you. So yes, I agree with you. I think alphabetically would be the release name, right?
Mhm.
I think milestone.
Is it currently by release name or by released
It's
created
like,
date?
Released at, I think is what
Yeah.
it's.
Released at. Okay.
Yeah, which is also interesting because it says in the UI it says created at, and all those releases I said, it looks like created at 2 years ago that I created yesterday. So we might want to change that to released at.
I think Jake has an OpenMR to fix that grammatical weirdness. And actually, let me show you something that I was playing around with yesterday, because it is kind of a weird use case. So I created this thing, and then Sean and Nathan, you guys helped me associate milestones. I created this tag right here, converted it to a release, and it shows up in the middle of completed past milestones and future milestones. So it's like if it doesn't have a milestone, it gets sandwiched between current, because it's released at is the date that it's sorted by right now. So technically I've released these already because I created them 17 hours ago, but since this is going to be created in 1 month, it's.
But if we had a drop down that allowed you to select, and for example, we defaulted to release title or tag name, then we're not imposing anything on the user, right? They can sort it
Right.
any way they want.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with the sorting criteria issue.
I wonder if it'd be cool to let folks sort by major release, like almost let them sort by semantic versioning. So you could kind of get that overall major release snapshot, but then you could also kind of plug in any patch releases in the order they were actually released. So you could see both of them. Because I think Nathan said this, but like 12.7.8 actually came after 12.9. So some folks might want to see that. I don't know, just thinking, brainstorming out loud a little bit.
That's almost exactly my other
Yeah.
point there. Is as another option to support a first class version concept.
Yeah.
I think that,
Okay.
yeah. So if we could, like, the releases could actually know and be aware of the actual version.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That could support that, which would be really cool.
I want to see both. I'd want to see 12.9 came out, and I'd want to be like, oh, cool, 12.7 has a patch too. So but that came after. That'd be kind of neat.
Yep. Both chronologically and like logically.
Yeah, totally.
If we sorted by tag name, and the users use semantic versioning, would that satisfy that?
Oh yeah, good call.
That's exactly what I was just typing right now, Sean. I was like, wouldn't?
Oh really?
Yeah.
No, I didn't look. I promise.
No, you're good. We had like a great mind meld there, because I was like, yeah. So tag name, I think, would be solving that use case.
It'd just be cool to maybe allow them to almost turn off patches, so they could just declutter their view maybe a little bit. I don't know if that's been beneficial or not.
Yeah, we could do a lot of, if we really knew exactly what the major minor patch releases, we could do a lot of cool filtering that we couldn't do just alphabetically. But yeah, alphabetically would probably get us halfway there.
That's something that we can validate too. Let me add that to my customer question repository. I'm like, how do you want to see releases? Because really what we're noticing is that people actually have a very picky selection that isn't supported by normal filtering. Like they almost want to have like a multi-select. Like I want to see releases that were created by a machine versus a person. Because that kind of suggests a hot fix versus a regular release. People also want to see things that we're releasing across multiple projects in the same group in a certain time frame, so that they can then trace back defect leakage. So it kind of is like they want to be able to select multiple filters across different projects to see releases in a comparative way. So like the usability of the releases page is really low right now for people who are trying to compare, and filtering is going to be more important than just sorting.
So Jackie, do you mean that we might end up with something like what we have on the issues page, where you've got all sorts of filtering options and
even like a Boolean logic and yeah.
the person, oh, well, there's no person, but is there evidence associated with it?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely something to think about. What I have scheduled for 13.0, we should consider if this is like, if there's a leaner MVC that we should be prioritizing, and then we can create like follow-up issues. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Just to kind of support that, where you're talking about different views, even for ourselves on our releases page, like not our project one, but the one that we currently publish. That one only contains major versions because that's kind of a marketing page. So we're like, that's the use case for that. So in that case, we don't want to show patch and security because that'd just be noise.
Right. And I could see where people who have multiple approvals for their releases, so they have manual jobs that then prevent a tag from being created until somebody runs that job, and then it creates the tag after all of the commits have been approved, which is what we see some of our financial services customers doing. They would want to only publish the release after it's been approved and be able to show on the release page only approved releases for everybody in the project or group. So that's like another sort of compliancy view that we'll have to think about supporting in the future. So like that marketing page use case, and then approved releases or images, or binaries rather, once we can support that.
Or maybe, I mean, this is really going far ahead, but maybe identify what type of release it is. It is a security patch, or it's a major release, or whatever. Yeah.
I like
It'd be cool if it's common enough. Like if we see that people generally create security or patch or hotfix, like there's some subset of things we can mark them.
I wonder if that could just be like a drop-down menu that people can then select from a list, like maybe it is.
Or even a label too. Like maybe you could associate a label with it.
Yeah, label would work.
That could have a really good value out there. Like,
Nathan, do you think we can already reuse this GitLab UI component for sorting? Not the filter, but I mean, we can have a combination of both, but I'm not sure if it's already in use.
I don't think we have any.
I haven't played around with that one. I think it's mostly for sorting a table, but we might be able to use that.
It's different.
Really, it just looks like a drop down almost.
Yeah, it's not the sorting drop down. If you open like the sorting item, it's not working. I think the demo, but it sorts the direction, and then it lets you choose, for example, if you want it to be sort alphabetically by start, end date, etc. And then you change that. This is for non-table components.
Yeah.
Is it a list view?
Yep.
Like, is the release page a list view today?
It's just it's not, we're not using any component to render it as a list. But I think that this sorting item could work with anything is my thought. Like this sorting, I'm guessing this component just kind of tells, you can just like kind of query it and ask it what its sorting is, and then sort your list the way you want. So I think we could probably make use of it. Yeah, that's a good find, Hannah.
I'm gonna comment this in that allow sorting by different criteria issue. Okay.
I have the next point too, the upcoming releases. I don't know if those, I see there's a bunch of comments. I don't know if that should have gone on the point above it.
The previous one, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. And we actually kind of already talked about this. I was thinking through, like, it'd be cool to create upcoming releases so we could see, for GitLab.com, so we could see like the progress bar getting filled out as we go through a milestone. But I don't think we create the tag that we need until we actually deploy it. So you can't create a release ahead of time because it's associated with the tag. So I'm curious how other people have solved that. And it sounds like we kind of already talked about that in other points too, which is interesting.
Yeah, you're definitely like honing on why I have a reminder on my calendar that after we cut the release for 12.9 to like create the tag manually, because I couldn't find a tag for that release until after it's done.
Right.
But today customers are like tagging the first commit of that release, and then they end up just attaching like links to the MRs that are committed in the subsequent releases or in the subsequent tags.
So we show that little commit ID in the release. For them, that wouldn't be a useful metric, right? Because that would be,
Right.
The release would actually contain stuff after that commit.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this kind of makes the case on being able to update the tag that the release references, because sometimes people would then want to point to the latest change that then declares this release complete. But
For sure.
kind of a weird thing. Tags are really great if you're releasing the change in the moment. Like for the tag releases, it's really tricky whenever we look at tags for future releases.
Yeah, I almost wish they weren't quite as tied together, like it was an optional relationship.
Yeah, and then we could associate a tag later. Like that would be nice.
Right.
They're currently, just at a technical issue level, they are currently, I think I've said this in a couple of posts, the way we're using tag is almost like it's the ID of the and so we have an issue where there are some that are blank and it's causing problems. Like it shouldn't have happened. I'm not sure how it's happened yet, but so they are completely tied. And so if we want to break that apart, we could, but it would be some effort actually, just because of the history in the way that it's been built.
Right.
They're just in just listening to everything that you all have been saying, and I'm coming from a background of using separate tools for releases. So using like a GitHub for release management of the code, but then using a different tool like a Jira for release project for the project. And so I'm kind of hearing just at a bird's eye view that it sounds like you're trying to merge those two worlds, where you can manage your next release in a project management way and not have it be related to a tag for an upcoming release. And that from a customer standpoint or in a use case sounds super helpful. I mean, I always, had a commitment to maybe a fuzzy hand wavy commitment to 2 or 3 releases in advance as to what may go in those releases, and being able to project manage and see what issues or epics may go in those releases is really helpful. So if that's decoupling it from a tag, I could see where that would be a really helpful use case for a project management standpoint of a release.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, I know that we are at time, or over time, really. Sorry, y'all. I might schedule another meeting with you guys next week, with you all next week, to kind of dive into upcoming draft releases and to think about how we want to manage that. Because from a vision side, like it's definitely something our customers need. They need to be able to plan and orchestrate releases without having their final version that they're going to deploy out. So whether that's you can create a release without a tag and then associate a tag later, or there's a different way that we manage it, I'm all ears on that.
Sure, Jackie, no problem. Can I just add one last thing right before we leave?
Yeah.
And so something we brought up a while back, and I'll just, leave a bit of a bomb, I guess, is, who has access to the evidence object? And we talked about maybe that being an auditor role. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because there's kind of like stuff swirling around about access to evidence in the issue sphere. And maybe we can discuss that at the next meeting,
Actually, I think I'm going to, today I was going to create the user stories for release evidence because we don't have them. And I think that will help define what people should be accessing them. And if there's a use case for maintainers and owners to even have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's weird when I look at the use case and who is interested in adopting this, it's exclusively for the compliance and audit personas. So I am weirded out that Aaron is using, the Aaron Goldenthal, who kind of raised this permission issue, is using it, because I wonder what he's using it for, given that we built it for a very specific use case. It's very interesting to hear that he's using it or interested in using it. But I think, yes, we can definitely talk about it in our next meeting. But I hope that we can resolve it this week and kind of understand like what changes we should make to it and create issues to change that permission structure and then send an update for it, because I am really confused as to why it's working the way it is. But I think it's even more conflated with the fact that like tags and releases are so coupled, and the permission structure for tags and releases are very specific. So we're kind of at the mercy of what that permission structure is, regardless of how release evidence should be used. So we probably should reconcile all of these at the same time, to kind of think about what makes sense for tag visibility. Okay, that sounds good. Let me know if you need anything else, y'all. I appreciate everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.